The first kiss wasn't planned. It happened in the rain, under the shelter of a centuries-old archway, water dripping around them like a curtain shielding them from the world. It was tentative at first, a question asked against soft, trembling lips. Then it was an answer, a surrender, a claiming. It tasted of rainwater and longing and the terrifying, beautiful truth they could no longer deny. It was the kind of kiss that rewrites destiny, the first note of a love song that would cost them everything to sing, but that they knew, in that moment, they would never, ever stop singing. Before we begin today's story, don't forget to subscribe. The Roman Elegy. Part 1. The Arrangement. The old Roman apartment, with its sun-bleached terracotta walls and windows that framed the city like living paintings, had been Professor Elisabetta Rossi's sanctuary for a decade. It was also profoundly lonely. The high ceilings echoed with the ghost of footsteps that weren't there, and the vast library felt more like a museum to a life of the mind than a lived-in space. The practicalities of life in such a large space, coupled with the quiet ache of solitude, finally compelled her to take action. A roommate, she announced to her friend and colleague, Marco, over espresso. Someone quiet, studious. A graduate student, perhaps. It would help with the rent, and, well, fill the silence. The advertisement was discreet, placed on the university's internal humanities board. The first and only response came from Chiara Fontana, a brilliant final-year undergraduate in her romantic poetry seminar. Elisabetta remembered her, a girl with intense, dark eyes that seemed to absorb every word, who spoke rarely but with a piercing clarity when she did. Chiara arrived on a Saturday, a single suitcase and a canvas bag overflowing with books. She was nervous, her posture taut as a violin string. "Professor Rossi," she said, her voice respectful. "Thank you for this opportunity." "Elisabetta, please," the professor corrected with a warm smile, ushering her in. "We are to be roommates, after all." The arrangement was seamless. Chiara was the ideal occupant, tidy, quiet, and deeply respectful of Elisabetta's space. They fell into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings were a silent sharing of the kitchen, the smell of Elisabetta's espresso mingling with Chiara's tea. Evenings often found them reading in the shared living room, a companionable silence between them, broken only by the turning of pages or the occasional thoughtful question from Chiara about a text. Elisabetta began to look forward to these moments. She found herself noticing things about Chiara, the way she tucked a strand of ink-black hair behind her ear when concentrating, the faint scent of sandalwood that followed her, the surprising softness of her laugh when Elisabetta made a dry, academic joke. The first crack in their professional facade appeared on a rainy Thursday. Elisabetta was working on a lecture, frustration mounting. Chiara entered, holding a book. "You referenced Petrarca's Sonnet 134 today," Chiara began, her voice hesitant. "But I was thinking, his portrayal of unrequited love feels so solitary, as if love is a burden to be borne alone." Elisabetta looked up, her frustration forgotten. "And you disagree?" "I think love is a conversation," Chiara said, her gaze unwavering. "Even unrequited. It changes both people. It's never a solitary act." Their eyes locked. The air in the study, usually thick with dust and intellect, suddenly felt charged, thin. Elisabetta felt a jolt, something entirely unbefitting a professor for her student. She looked away first, her heart hammering against her ribs. "A fascinating perspective, Chiara," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "Thank you, Professor Elisabetta," Chiara whispered before retreating. The following week, Chiara's sister, Lucia Bianchi, arrived from Milan for a visit. Lucia was Chiara's opposite. Where Chiara was composed stillness, Lucia was vibrant, sunny motion. Her blonde hair was a bright shock against the apartment's ancient tones, and her laughter was a frequent, welcome sound. "I hope it's not an imposition," Chiara had asked anxiously. "She's between flats. It would just be for a few weeks." "Of course not," Elisabetta said, and she meant it. Lucia's energy was infectious. What none of them anticipated was the immediate, gravitational pull between Lucia and Francesca, Chiara's older sister, who came for dinner that first night. Francesca was a photographer, her hands always faintly smelling of chemicals and her eyes seeing the world in frames and light. She and Lucia fell into conversation about art and life with an ease that was breathtaking to witness. It was as if they were speaking a private language, their laughter a private melody. The planned few weeks for Lucia's visit began to feel indefinite. The apartment, once echoing with silence, was now full of life. The four women created a delicate, unexpected ecosystem. Francesca was constantly over, her camera equipment colonizing a corner of the living room. Lucia, it turned out, was a fantastic cook, and the smell of her sauces began to seep into the very bricks of the apartment. One evening, Elisabetta walked into the kitchen to find Lucia and Francesca at the table, their heads close together, speaking in hushed tones. Lucia was teaching Francesca how to weave a bracelet from thread she'd bought at the market. Their fingers were intertwined with the colorful strings, and the look they shared was so full of tender, unspoken understanding that Elisabetta backed out silently, a strange pang of longing in her chest. She found Chiara on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the Roman skyline in hues of orange and purple. "They're good together," Elisabetta said softly, leaning on the railing next to her. Chiara nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "They are. It's like they've known each other for lifetimes." She turned to look at Elisabetta, the dying light catching in her dark eyes. "Do you believe in that? In finding a person and just knowing?" The question hung between them, heavy and significant. The sounds of the city, the distant hum of vespers, the chatter from a cafe below, faded into a blur. "I'm beginning to," Elisabetta breathed. Without a word, as if moved by the same unseen force, they leaned in. Their first kiss was not a collision, but a discovery. It was hesitant, a question asked in the space between their lips. It tasted of the evening air and the lingering sweetness of Chiara's wine and the terrifying, exhilarating leap into the unknown. When they pulled apart, the world had irrevocably shifted. "Elisabetta," Chiara whispered, her voice trembling. Elisabetta brought a hand to Chiara's cheek, her thumb stroking the soft skin. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes, a mixture of awe, fear, and undeniable love, said everything. Part 2. The Unveiling. The kiss on the balcony was a secret that bloomed in the dark, transforming everything. Their relationship became a second, hidden life within the apartment. Stolen glances across the breakfast table held the heat of a memory. A brush of hands while washing dishes sent electric currents up their arms. They began to steal moments, a passionate, silent kiss in the hallway when the others were out, falling asleep in Elisabetta's large bed after everyone else was asleep, only for Chiara to slip back to her own room before dawn. It was a beautiful, unsustainable lie. The pressure began to mount at the university. Elisabetta, once known for her cool detachment, now found her lectures infused with a new, raw passion that her students noticed. She spoke of Sappho's fragmented verses not as historical artifacts, but as living, breathing testaments to a love she now understood in her very bones. And she always spoke to Chiara's intent gaze in the third row, pouring the meaning into her eyes alone. Rumors, once idle, began to solidify. A colleague made a veiled comment about getting too close to one subject matter. The department head, a kind but traditional man, called her in. "Elisabetta, your work is brilliant as ever," he began, steepling his fingers. "But there's talk about you and a student. A Fontana girl. I'm sure it's nothing, but perception is its own reality. Be careful." She left his office feeling cold. The world outside her sun-drenched apartment was not ready for their truth. At home, the truth was blossoming spectacularly. Lucia and Francesca's relationship had moved past subtle glances and woven bracelets. They were openly, joyfully in love. They held hands on the sofa, danced in the kitchen to music only they could hear, and their happiness was a bright, defiant flag flying in the heart of the apartment. Their love was a public celebration. Elisabetta and Chiara's was a private sacrament. The strain finally broke one night. The four of them were sharing a bottle of wine, celebrating Francesca's successful gallery show. Lucia was curled into Francesca's side, Francesca's arm around her, playing idly with her hair. The affection was so natural, so unguarded. Chiara watched them, and Elisabetta saw the yearning in her eyes, not for Francesca or Lucia, but for that freedom. Their secret, once a precious shared treasure, now felt like a chain. Later, in the darkness of Elisabetta's bedroom, Chiara turned to her. "I'm tired of hiding," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I want to hold your hand in the light. I want to kiss you goodnight without worrying about who might see. I love you, Elisabetta. Isn't that the most important thing?" Elisabetta's heart swelled and broke simultaneously. She pulled Chiara closer, breathing in her scent. "It is the most important thing, my love. It is everything. But my job, the world." "Our love isn't in your job," Chiara argued gently. "It's in here. In us." The next day, at a university faculty garden party, the world intruded. Chiara had come, as many students did, to mingle. She and Elisabetta maintained a careful distance, but their awareness of each other was a palpable force field. As Chiara turned to leave, she caught Elisabetta's eye across the lawn. It was just a look, but it was full of such intimate, unmistakable love that it might as well have been a shout. The department head saw it. His face fell, then tightened with disappointment. The following Monday, Elisabetta was formally asked to resign. The official reason was a breach of professional boundaries, a cold, clinical phrase that erased the poetry of what they shared. Her career, the thing that had defined her for 20 years, was over. She walked home in a daze, the weight of the world on her shoulders. She found Chiara waiting for her, her face pale with worry. "They know," Elisabetta said, her voice hollow. "I've been asked to leave." Chiara's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "No. No, because of me." "No," Elisabetta said fiercely, pulling her into her arms. "Because of us. Because I love you. And I would choose you again. 1,000 times over, I would choose you." It was then, in their shared heartbreak, that they decided to stop hiding. They walked hand in hand into the living room, where Lucia and Francesca were, and told them everything. There were tears, not of shock, but of understanding and shared defiance. "We love you," Francesca said, hugging them both tightly. "And we're with you." Part 3, The Choice. Leaving the university was a seismic shift. The life Elisabetta had known was gone. But in its place, something new and resilient began to grow. Freed from the constraints of her position, their love could finally exist in the open, at least within the walls of their home. Their physical relationship, once a series of stolen, frantic moments, deepened into a slow, explorative journey. Elisabetta, who had always been so controlled, learned to let go under Chiara's tender guidance. Their intimacy was a conversation, a language of touch they were learning together. One evening, Elisabetta led Chiara to her bed, the room lit only by candlelight. She kissed her not with the hunger of secrecy, but with the profound reverence of someone unveiling a masterpiece. She traced the lines of Chiara's body with her fingertips and her lips, learning her geography, committing every sigh, every tremor to memory. It was a loving exploration, a worship of skin and soul that was deeply passionate and profoundly intimate, a testament to a connection that went far beyond the physical. They moved together in a rhythm that was uniquely theirs, a silent, powerful language of love that left them breathless and entwined, their hearts beating against each other in the quiet dark. "I've never felt so seen," Chiara whispered afterward, her head on Elisabetta's chest. "You are a poem I've been waiting my whole life to read," Elisabetta replied, her voice soft with awe. Meanwhile, Lucia and Francesca decided to move to Milan together, to chase Francesca's next big project and build a life in a new city. Their departure was bittersweet, leaving a quiet emptiness in the apartment. It was in this new quiet that Elisabetta found her purpose again. She began to write, not dry academic texts, but a passionate, lyrical memoir weaving together the history of Rome, the poetry of Sappho, and the story of a love that dared to speak its name. Chiara was her muse, her editor, her constant support. One afternoon, as they sat amidst piles of research in what was once a formal study and was now their shared creative chaos, Elisabetta looked at Chiara, really looked at her. She saw the woman who had chosen her, who had stood by her, who had given up her own final year at that university to avoid the gossip and torment, transferring her credits to complete her degree elsewhere. "Marry me," Elisabetta said, the words coming out not as a question, but as a statement of inevitable fact. Chiara dropped the book she was holding. What? I know it's not legal here. I know it will be a fight. I know our families, my family, Elisabetta's voice caught. Her parents, elderly and traditional, had already withdrawn from her life, unable to understand. But I want to stand in front of the people we love, the people who truly see us, and promise myself to you. I want to be your wife. Tears streamed down Chiara's face. They were tears of joy, of grief for the families that might not come, of defiance for the world that said no. Yes, she breathed, launching herself into Elisabetta's arms. 1,000 times, yes. The societal pressure was immediate and harsh. Chiara's mother, upon hearing the news, cried for a week and refused to speak to her. Old friends from the academic world sent thinly veiled letters of disapproval. They were whispered about in their neighborhood, stared at in the market. But they also found their allies. Marco, Elisabetta's old friend, stood by them, offering to officiate their commitment ceremony. A few brave former colleagues sent their well wishes. Lucia and Francesca were their fiercest champions, planning a clandestine wedding in the Tuscan countryside, far from the judging eyes of Rome. The ceremony was small, held in the garden of a villa owned by a friend of a friend. The air smelled of rosemary and blooming jasmine. Francesca was Lucia's best woman, her eyes shining with pride. Marco stood before them, his voice emotional. Elisabetta, in a simple linen suit, and Chiara, in a flowing cream dress, held hands. They had written their own vows. Chiara, Elisabetta began, her voice strong and clear. You taught me that love is a conversation. You walked into my silent museum of a life and you made it sing. You are my most brilliant student, my most cherished love, my forever roommate. I choose you, today and every day, to be my wife. Chiara's tears were happy ones now. Elisabetta, you taught me that love is courage. You gave me a home not just in your apartment, but in your heart. I am no longer your student, but I will forever be your devoted partner, your biggest fan, your wife. I choose you. They exchanged rings, simple bands of etched gold. And then, under the Tuscan sun, surrounded by the few who loved them, they kissed. It was a kiss of promise, of victory, of a future they would build together, one day at a time. Part 4, The New World. They honeymooned in Greece, walking the paths of the poets Elisabetta had spent her life studying. But now, the words were alive. Holding Chiara's hand on the cliffs of Lesbos, reading Sappho's fragments to her as the sun set over the Aegean Sea, was the culmination of her life's work, the answer to a question she hadn't known she was asking. Returning to Rome, they were different. They were wives. The world outside hadn't changed, the stares, the whispers, the occasional outright hostility were still there. But they had an armor now, forged in the fire of their commitment and sealed with their vows. Elisabetta's book, The Roman Elegy, was published to quiet but significant acclaim. It was hailed as a brave and beautiful merging of the personal and the academic. Offers began to trickle in, from smaller, progressive colleges abroad, from literary festivals, from publishers wanting more. One offer was too good to refuse, a visiting professorship at a university in Amsterdam, a city that promised not just tolerance, but celebration. It was a chance to start anew, in a place where they could hold hands on the street without a second thought, where their marriage could be not just a private commitment, but a public fact. Standing on their balcony for the last time, looking out at their beloved Roman skyline, they felt a pang of loss. This apartment had been the cradle of their love. It had held their secrets, their first kiss, their heartbreak, and their greatest joy. Are you ready? Chiara asked, lacing her fingers through Elisabetta's. The new rings on their fingers glinted in the light. Elisabetta turned to her, seeing not her student, but her partner, her wife, her future. She saw the strength in her eyes, the love that had cost them everything and given them everything. I have never been more ready, Elisabetta said, leaning in to kiss her. It was a kiss full of memory and promise, a seal on the past and a key to the future. As long as I'm with you, I am home. They left Rome not as a professor and her student fleeing scandal, but as Elisabetta and Chiara Rosafontana, authors and wives, walking hand in hand toward a new world, their love story finally, and forever, their own. Conclusion: the eternal city. Amsterdam welcomed them with open arms. The canals, reflecting the crisp northern light, were a world away from the sun-baked piazzas of Rome, but they quickly became a new kind of beautiful. Their apartment was smaller, but it was filled with a light, airy freedom that their Roman home had never possessed. Here, they were simply Elisabetta and Chiara. They held hands on bridges, shared quick kisses on tram platforms, and built a life where their love was not a secret to be kept, but a fact to be celebrated. Elisabetta's lectures at the university were standing room only. Students flocked to hear the renowned author of the Roman Elegy, a woman who spoke of classical poetry not as a relic, but as a living, breathing force that echoed in the human heart. Chiara, meanwhile, flourished. She enrolled in a graduate program and began writing her own poetry, her voice sharp, modern, and deeply influenced by the woman who had first taught her how to listen. They built a community of artists, writers, and free thinkers. Their dinner table was often full of laughter and passionate debate, a vibrant echo of the quiet meals they had once shared alone. Sometimes, in the middle of a conversation, their eyes would meet across the room and a silent, profound understanding would pass between them, a remembrance of the cost and the priceless value of all they had gained. One spring evening, they returned to Rome for a literary festival. Walking through the familiar streets was like stepping into a photograph of their former selves. They visited the old apartment, now home to a young Dutch sculptor who invited them in for coffee. The terracotta walls were now a bold blue, the bookshelves gone, replaced by half-finished statues. It was no longer their sanctuary, and that was okay. Their sanctuary was now portable. It existed in the space between their clasped hands. On their last night, they found themselves under that same centuries-old archway where the story had begun in the rain. Tonight, the sky was clear, dotted with stars. "It started here," Chiara whispered, leaning her head on Elisabetta's shoulder. "No," Elisabetta corrected softly, wrapping an arm around her wife. "It almost started here. It truly started when we were brave enough to continue." She turned Chiara to face her, their hands finding each other's rings by instinct. "This city gave us our beginning. But it is not our whole story. Our story is everywhere we are together." They kissed then, not with the desperate hunger of their first kiss or the defiant passion of their vows, but with the deep, settled certainty of a love that had been tested and tempered into something unbreakable. It tasted of familiarity, of shared history, and of a future still being written. They had lost a world, but in doing so, they had found a much larger one. And as they walked away from the archway, their footsteps echoing in harmony on the ancient cobblestones, it was clear. The elegy for their old life had been sung. The song that remained was a joyous, enduring ode to the new world they had built and the eternal, unending conversation of their love.